Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Nightlight. We have Ken Quiethawk to thank for that amazing introduction. You can find him at nativestorytellers.com. Check his website out. His native storytelling talents are quite profound. They're all stories that are verbal stories that have been passed down through the centuries, and it's a really cool way to remember your history. Possibly we should be looking more into something like that. So, for tonight, Mark has some very eclectically oriented, unusual people, as always, to entertain us and inform us. He's gathered a couple together that are really cool, and it feels like it's going to be a really great evening. So be ready to have your mind enlightened and stretched a little bit. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
Fine, how are you?
Doing well.
Yeah, last week you said several people called in for me to do readings. I don't do that. I just talk about old stuff and be radio eye candy. But I'm appreciative of their vote of confidence for me. But and also very appreciative of all the listeners' supports as well. But I think tonight's show is an example of why the CDC has declared Nightlight a public health nuisance. We're going to be raising IQs at an alarming rate tonight. And we have another new guest for Nightlight as well. But Ron is not a stranger to radio. Our guest is Ron Rademacher, and he's one of my colleagues at Ancient American Magazine. He is a travel writer. His book is Oddities and Rarities. He's the founder of the website MichiganBackroads.com. He's also a radio personality and a presenter, frequently a presenter at the annual Ancient Artifact Preservation Society conferences. He'll be there this year, and he is the leading authority on the enigmatic MacIntosh Stone. So I just want to welcome Ron to Nightlight. How are you, Ron?
I am struggling. Usually my response to that question would be that I'm happy, healthy, and feel great. But I'm struggling with you being described as radio eye candy.
It's very appropriate.
If you Google radio eye candy, you will find my picture there and Bob the Turk. You won't find it. So I'm doing great, and I'm delighted to be here. Radio eye candy. Oh, my God.
like the first hour tonight. This is becoming like almost like a weekly occurrence on Nightlight Part 2. Is what was going on in Michigan during ancient times. It's what Lon's been on a couple times, and Richard Balthazar, what like a month ago. We're getting all these stories about ancient Michigan and all these unusual artifacts, and I came across your articles in Ancient American. You're in edition 115 and 120. These really intriguing photos of this MacIntosh Stone. It really captured my attention, and I was like, this is something that needs to be discussed. And all right, let's hear like a little brief history on where was this stone found. Who found it? The location. Is there like a archaeological context in which it was found?
Well, excellent questions. And so I'll give you a brief rundown. I first ran across the existence of this stone in a little booklet called Coming for Copper. It's published by the Ancient Artifact Preservation Society, and it's Fred Ridholm's tome about all the copper that's missing from Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula. And on page 26 of that little booklet was this small picture of this little stone, and it says small marked stone found on Lake Superior, and it's about the size of an almond. Now, everything is going to get a little strange here, but this is all about serendipity, because the series of coincidences and pure accidents that happen that we're going to talk about over the next 45 minutes, it's just absolutely amazing. So I'll start with where it was found. This stone was found on the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula, up where the missile site used to be, and it was found about 50 feet above the current lakeshore level. And it was found by a guy, Charlie MacIntosh, he's a forester. He goes out and marks trees that need to be forested off. And he, in his spare time, goes out and picks up agates. And little agates, they're like little gemstones. And I wouldn't know one if it dropped out of the sky and hit you on the head, but when you polish them up, they're beautiful. Well, he gets them by the bucketful, and he went back to his garage one day and was cleaning them, and he discovered one of them was covered with these carvings. So this happened, and now I'm going to give you an odd thing that happened. I was going through the Upper Peninsula, and I track these things down. I go looking for enigmas and anomalies, and I really don't have a dog in the hunt as to where they came from. I go after, is this thing real? Does it still exist? Can we go see it? And then from there, I let the experts take over. So I was going through the Upper Peninsula, and I went to a place called Nama, and I stopped at a place called the Nama Inn and got talking to the people there about, working with me on Michigan back roads. And one thing led to another, and we got talking about tracking down these anomalies. And I said, I saw this picture of this MacIntosh stone here. I said, have you ever heard of this? You'll hardly believe it. The guy I was talking to was Charlie MacIntosh, who is co-owner of that inn, and he is the one who found the stone. So that's how I ran across it for the very first time. Mm-hmm. And I said, does it still exist? He said, oh, yeah, sure, you want to see it? And he went back and he got it. And he brought it out, and we began to examine it. And that's how I found out about it for the very first time. This is going to be 10 or 12 years ago.
Okay. And in the both edition, 115 and 120 editions, you do have some photos, and when tomorrow, when the YouTube video or archive becomes available, the photos are also going to scroll by on the archive, and people can follow along. With the rotating pictures, there are a number of different angles you've taken of it. There's let's say a little bit of weathering. Maybe you do mention the possibility of this being carried by a sailor, and it's not uncommon for someone to have like a coin or something like that in their pocket, and they just kind of rub the stone or coin, just like a little grounding technique. So maybe some of the weathering or of the ends could be from that, but the images are pretty clear. What?
Well, they are.
Yeah,
clear,
what are we
they
seeing?
Are clear on the. Well, they are clear on the new high-res pictures. Let me just take you through what a strange little rock this is, and these are on Michigan back roads, and you're going to put them up. This is the first time we've ever talked about the new thing. So let me just take you through the history of, we found this stone, and there are two sides to the stone. Both sides are heavily carved. And we're going to have a picture up there that shows it with a dime next to it so people can see how small this little thing is, because that's going to bring up the question of, what kind of tool could possibly have been used.
Right.
To carve this little tiny thing, because these are very detailed. But basically, to begin with, we called one side of the stone the moon side, and the other side the spider side. And here's why. When I first saw the stone, and if you go get the book, this little booklet Coming for Copper, the stone is depicted there vertically. So, of course, that's how we all began to look at it. Well, then when I photographed it, Charlie MacIntosh had to name it in, he brought it out, let me photograph it. I laid it on its side, not, because I'm not, that's just how I did it. And so the moon side shows what appears to be a crescent moon. That's why we call it the moon side. It appears to be a crescent moon, and then several other carvings, all in cartouches that we really didn't know what they were. This is now, we're going back 8 years now. On the other side, which we called, just for the purposes of the discussion, as I was trying to track down what this thing was a side that we called the spider side. And that is because on one end of that stone, there is what appears to be an 8-legged spider. And if you look at it, you can see his fat body, and you can see 2 legs on the left lower, 2 legs on the right lower, 2 legs on the, and so it's 8-legged, and that side was the spider side. Everything else on that side was just gobbledygook. We had no idea what any of it could be. So I've got a moon, I got a half moon, a crescent moon, and I've got a spider, and I began to talk to people all across the United States, sent them pictures all over Europe. I'm not an epigraphic expert. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a storyteller. But when I find something like this, I track it down. And so I sent these pictures all over, and people who responded said, oh, yeah, we think that this is a spider. And, of course, a spider is a symbol from across the world. And a crescent moon is also in the patina on this stone. It's got a high polish to it in its original color, which is a brownish. And so people who had looked at it were figuring that this stone could be dated between 1 or 200 BC to 2 or 300 AD. And so from that dating and the possible spider and the possible crescent moon, we thought, well, either this is Native American, possibly Hopewell, or it could be Mediterranean with these two symbols, and it could be a prayer stone that a sailor would have carried with him as a totem or a blessing stone to remember when to say his prayers. And that's where that kind of rested for many years. In fact, this is not something you'll hear every day, Mark, but in my book, Oddities and Rarities, the current existing chapter on this stone is almost entirely wrong in every single conclusion that is drawn. Everything that we thought was wrong. And would you like me to tell you why?
Sure.
And how that came about? So here's what happened. So that's where all this rested for several years. I mean, I tracked it down, but I have a business to run, and I can only do so much, and no one really knew what this was. Now we jumped to about 3 years ago, and I was at the Ancient Artifact Preservation Society conference, and Charlie MacIntosh let me take the stone with me because there were going to be a lot of people there who knew this kind of symbolism and might be able to interpret it. And I beat on everybody we were merciless, to get people to get the loops out, those, the magnifying glasses that jewelers use, and look at this stone. And people looked at it, and nobody really had any idea what they were seeing. They were like, yeah, I don't these are a lot of luminaries. Ms. Willow thought that the crescent moon might be a ship, but really nobody came up with anything else. All right, now get ready for the next bit of serendipity.
Okay.
I left that conference. This is 2 or 3 years ago. I left the conference, went back to the Naima Inn to return the stone to Charlie. And it was a Sunday. We got on Sunday morning, and we're sitting around the inn and talking. There were a bunch of guests there, and Charlie was asking me what all the people thought at the conference. And I said, we really didn't get anywhere. Nobody could really see anything here. And I'm just as baffled as I can ever be. So the guests who were sitting there said, well, can we see it? So we opened up my laptop and brought up the pictures. And we're just going through the pictures of what I have. And a woman, Dottie Parsons, is sitting there, and she's looking at it, and she said, well, wait a minute, stop that picture right there. Can you flip that over? And I said, yeah, sure, I can flip it over. And so the side that is ordinarily called spider, I flipped it over, and she looked at it, she said, well, this is plain as day. She said, that's a man right there. That's a man's face right there. And when you see this on your feed that you guys are going to put up, there are 3 cartouches on this side, and in the center, very clearly, what you know what to look for is a man's face, and he's got his hands up in the air, or he's holding a sword, and then just below his head is what looks like a coat of arms, and then below that is his legs. He's kneeling. To the right of him is the image that was the spider. But now we can see that that's actually another man sitting on some kind of a seat or a throne with his hands up in the air in a posture of a blessing or benediction. To the extreme left now, we have, I'll stop in this second. Let me just give this part, and then I'll let you jump in. To the left is another part that was all this was all gobbledygook. Now to the left, there's another cartouche there, and there is another human image there. So go ahead and ask me what you're going to ask.
Okay. Well, your chapter is wrong just because he's got so many new interpretations of this artwork. Well,
it's wrong in that, yes. It's wrong in that for 2 reasons. First, I was looking at it the wrong way, and it's wrong. It's not wrong that everybody was wrong. It's just that it's incorrect in its interpretations. Right. Because what we were seeing was, but very seldom do you hear an author say, "Oh yeah, this is everything I wrote here is crap." And I'm going to rewrite it because so it is so then now here's the next thing that happens. So we're all looking at it. There's 8 or 10 of us sitting around there, and none of us are professionals. These are just people. And but because we looked at that upside down, which turned out to be correct, now we go to the moon side, and we said, well, let's flip that over and see what is there. And so we flip that over, and now the crescent moon looks like a double-hulled ship, which is what Ms. Willow had said. She thought it was a ship, not a crescent moon. Everything else on it remained enigmatic. There is what appears to be a bird head above the double-hulled ship, which also turns out that it's not a bird head. But so we looked it over, and we were all astonished because you can very clearly see these human figures carved on this stone. I mean, it's not gobbledygook. They are human figures. And this was all just happening impromptu at the inn. So when I left, I said to Charlie, I said, you know what? Can I borrow the stone? Because this is it. I am going to employ a professional photographer. And I'm going to get this thing under high resolution, high magnification, and get really good pictures taken of what's on the stone because I can't see it. But if we're missing that just because of my poor photography, I've got to pursue this further. And that's what we decided to do.
And Ron, you mentioned if you look at the stone one way, you mentioned people saw a crescent moon, and you do have that symbol showing up in some of the Hopewell earthworks, like the semicircular patio in front of the Circleville mound that was in the a big circle, and the Hopewell were very sophisticated astronomers, so that could be an example of some type of Hopewell artwork. But you said if you look at the stone another way, you get like the double-hulled ship image. Who's building, like doing this naval engineering at some time in the remote past?
Well, this is another excellent question, and this is going to, because a series of, I mentioned earlier that there are a series of coincidences and serendipity that took place to how we've gotten to where we are on this now. And I'll give you that part. But the interpretation of the moon side as being a crescent moon, almost everybody agreed with it, and it was only because that was the way that they were. That was the orientation that they were shown the stone. No one really knew about this stone. It was in this coming for copper, and it was shown vertically rather than horizontally as I show it. And when I was sending it out to people, I was sending it out a specific way, and the way that I sent it out, a crescent moon is what catches the eye, and a spider, and the Native Americans had spiders, the Hopewell had spiders. The spider totem is ancient, so we kind of saw what we expected to see, and so no one really made a mistake. It was just. It was only because this woman had to say, well, that's a man right there. That's not gobbledygook. Turn it over. So when I had the pictures taken, the high-res pictures taken, a couple other things happened. Now, when you look at these online, you'll see that the stone appears to be gray because the way the high-res pictures are taken is they put this thing in the light box, and then the camera is a computer-driven camera that makes slices, and these images are made up of 35 slices, so it gets very deep, and it brings out all kinds of detail we could not see before. So when we put this up now and we see what we call men, the image of the man in a position of prayer or on his knees is very clear in the center, and the position of another man sitting on the right with his hands up and his feet up and down, his shins are there, he might have a halo. All this becomes very clear because now we know that's what we're supposed to be looking for. And if you go to the other side where the ship is, you can see that, well, if you turn it over this way, it may not be a crescent moon, maybe it is a double-hulled ship, but maybe that thing above it is the head of a bird. So here, and then there are other cartouches on the ship side that have not yet been interpreted. But you can see the patina, even though it's turned gray, the patina is very clear on how old this is. So now here's what happens next. So, because this gets even stranger. So I'm sitting one day, as I do, and I'm looking through a book called Bronze Age America by Barry Fell. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with that book. And I'm flipping through the book and just, not really paying a whole lot of attention to what I'm doing. I'm flipping through the book. And I come to a page, and there's an illustration that shows, and I sent it to you guys, and I'm sure you're going to put it up. It's called Barry Fell. And there's a picture of a double-hulled ship with little dots. And then next to it is a symbol. Below it is a symbol that is almost identical to the bird head that's above the ship on the MacIntosh Stone. And it's called a buckler or a buckla. Now, this image is from a Bronze Age carving, and it's from a museum in Scandinavia. And the way that Barry Fell interpreted this carving was thrust upon the water as for a journey. So I'm looking at this, and I realize, I'm thinking to myself, I've seen this somewhere before. And if you take the image that is there from Barry Fell's book and put it next to the part of the MacIntosh Stone that we call Boat 12, on the left-hand side, you can see the two-hulled ship, and above it is not a bird head, but it's that same carving, that almost a figure-8 carving, which they call the buckla or a buckler. And those two images combined translate into thrust upon the waters as for a voyage. It wouldn't mean much except that on the other side are three men in various positions of benediction or blessing or hope, which could easily be interpreted as a benediction for a journey. So that was another interesting, and there's one more if you want to hear. I've got one more very odd coincidence that happened with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So so this has all happened. I was going to bring up the timeline again. So I had the pictures taken several months after the AAPS meeting, and then I got them back, and of course I didn't have time to really go through them. But then when I saw the picture from Barry Fell's book, which I'll have at the AAPS meeting so everybody can see the pictures actually there, that I saw that. So I went back to the high-res pictures that the photographer had done. I said, wait a minute, geez, this is... So then several more months go by, and I'm in the Upper Peninsula this past January or February, whatever it was. I was up near Ontonagon during this last polar vortex storm, whatever that was, January, February, when we had snow. And I was trapped in my cabin. I could not get out of the cabin. And I'm not a television watcher. I don't watch television, but I had the TV on for background noise. And I was writing away, and I had the History Channel on. And oddly enough, Scott Wolter was on, and they were talking about the Westford Knight. Now, I don't know anything about the Westford Knight. This is a carving of a stone that was found in Massachusetts, Westford, Massachusetts.
Right.
And it's been very controversial. It's got, there's a knight there with a long sword, and he's Caucasian-looking and Templar-looking. And the story was about, the edition on TV was about they were commemorating a bronze statue.
Yeah, it's from
the Westford Knight.
Yeah, this Sinclair voyage to America in 1398 or so.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you know more about it. Obviously, everybody knows more about it than I do because I don't look much outside of Michigan. But that's right, and it was 1394, so it was before 1492. So of course it's very controversial. And I'm sitting there and I'm just doing what I'm doing, and the way that Providence jumps into your life, I just happened to glance up at the screen, and at that moment, they flash an image of the bronze commemorative statue and a line sketch of the Westford Knight, the actual stone, and it's the line sketch. And there it is. It's not on his face, and it's not on his sword, but on his shield is a double-hulled ship, and above it is the buckler symbol. It's exactly the same symbol that is on is in Barry Fell's book, and exactly the same symbol that is carved into the MacIntosh Stone. I mean, I was just dumbfounded because I had never even thought about that aspect of it. But here we have a Bronze Age carving from Scandinavia and a stone that was found on the Keweenaw Peninsula in the mid-1900s, and the Westford Knight, all with exactly the same symbolism carved on them, all connected with knights and all connected with voyages on the sea. I mean, the coincidence is if it's a coincidence, it's the most astronomical coincidence I've ever heard of.
Well, Ron, when we had Richard Thornton on, about a month ago, 5 weeks ago, and he was talking about some of the petroglyph images that he saw in Scandinavia, and the same symbol was appearing in Georgia. They were like couple 2,000-3,000 years old. That's what he's asserting. I think when we had Bill Mann on back last fall, he was talking about some very close similarities between the flag of the Earls of Orkney and the Micmac nation flag. They're just almost; those were almost identical as well. So this transatlantic artistic motif imagery keeps reappearing with many of our researcher guests. Yeah, and I mean that shouldn't really be surprising if you hark back to like 1000 AD or before that, and up to 1500 AD. Most people were illiterate. Most people were illiterate. Most people did not have letters. In fact, some nations didn't actually have alphabets. I mean, so a lot was done with symbolism. If you watch old period movies, like even things like Barry Lyndon that Stanley Kubrick did, there's a scene there where Ryan O'Neal is riding up to a pub, and the sign hanging out in front of the pub doesn't have words on it. It has a symbol on it.
and everyone knew that that symbol represented that it was a public house. And you could get food and drink there.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is very, very common to use symbols to represent ideas, important ideas. And that was where the whole concept about this stone being at one time we were fairly convinced that it was a Phoenician or a Minoan prayer stone, because those sailors were known to be from many different nations, and many of them carried a prayer stone with them, so that when they were on the waters, or when important dates would come around, because some of these voyages lasted a long, long time, they would know that stone reminded them of how and when to do their prayers. And so these are this is what amazes me is how odd it is that more people don't make the connection between, and I had not made it. I mean, I was caught completely by surprise by this Westward Night thing, because here was one more example of they're not similar carvings, they're identical carvings, and they're from three different places in the world, from three different timelines. It's almost impossible that it's I would just wonder how many other things are out there in small museums and small collections that support this idea that these voyagers not only came here, but they came here and went back repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, and Ron, when you talk about the appearance of this small stone, seems like a cartouche. Probably most of the listeners are thinking, "Oh, it sounds Egyptian, Middle Eastern," and the spider imagery. Okay, and get that from just different areas of the world. But we know that the cobra was part of the Egyptian iconography. There's also you also note that there's a fish image on the stone. Okay, that could be. It is a Christian image from what I think that started like 200 or 300 A.D. So this stone just seems real like a. It's hard to date because you might have different religious symbols carved into it, or it's coming from different parts of the world.
It's a good, it's very good detail to point out that the term cartouche is an unfortunate one. I think I may have been the first person who used it, because a cartouche is really a set of symbols that are separated by a frame, and it was first used in conjunction with Egyptian cartouches that were used to frame the name of a pharaoh in a hieroglyph. And this stone does have, like on the side that has the men on it, there are three distinct frames. If you saw it on the wall, you call it a triptych. There are three distinct frames. And so the word cartouche came up, which may have got people thinking about, well, maybe this is Mediterranean, maybe it is Egyptian. I don't think there's anything Egyptian about it, but I will say this about that, and that is that the way that I go at trying to figure out what something like this is, and again, my training is very limited. I do it by the process of elimination. Is not. And what it is not is Egyptian. There's no question it is not Egyptian, but it could and it is probably not Native American. When you see the pictures of the men side, you'll say, well, these are not Native American men. These are obviously European appearing men. So, but that doesn't mean that it's not very, very old. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's medieval. It could be far older than that, because European Europeans were messing around in the Mediterranean Sea, and the men on it and the way that they are depicted, and if we agree that the double-hulled ship is in fact a ship and not a crescent moon, it eliminates pretty much Egyptian, and it eliminates Native American, which drops it into Mediterranean. Now, some people say, well, how could the Mediterranean people have gotten over and dropped this on the Keweenaw Peninsula? And I'm working up a whole article on the copper culture, but let me just say this about that. A lot of people don't realize that the distance from the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea to the western end at the Straits of Gibraltar, that sailing distance is greater than the distance from the bulge of Africa to Brazil. From the bulge of Africa to Brazil is a shorter distance than the length of the Mediterranean Sea. So the distance was not the issue. That's the only point I'm making there. Well, they couldn't have made that great long sail. Well, they were doing it every day. The Phoenicians were sailing back and forth across the Mediterranean every day, which is a far more dangerous body of water than the South Atlantic will ever be. So yeah, so the word cartouche, is an unfortunate one, but it was the only way really to describe it, to describe what's on the stone. And please keep in mind, this thing is the size of a quarter. And how someone did this, and why someone would take the time when you see these pictures. These are intricate carvings. These are not crude at all. There's a great deal of detail, and so someone did it with a purpose. You're an artist. Other artists will know that when you create a piece of art or a piece of work that takes you several days of your life, you don't do it frivolously, and this was not done frivolously.
Ron, gets us to the point where we need to talk about the types of tools that could have been used. It's not just like you were talking about earlier with the patina, some of the wear at one of the ends. This is older, so there had to be some kind of like really fine tool that was used to carve these images deep enough into this basically a pebble, and it's probably going to have some kind of vice or channel locks to hold it in place while you're carving it. But they're going deep enough into this pebble that the weathering really didn't affect the entire rock. So the images are still there.
You would think that it would be, you would think that the images would be completely worn off.
They're not.
This was found, like I said, it was 50 feet above the current shoreline of Lake Superior. Who knows how long it had laid there, being tossed around. And the patina is quite rich. You can tell this has been handled a lot over a long period of time. So who knows how that thing... By the way, and I want to make sure that we get this in because I don't know how much time we have left, but this is not something that has been lost, by the way. This is an artifact that exists. And if people want to go see it, they can go see it. They can go to... I hope that qualified people go to examine this object because it exists up there in Nema, Michigan, and Charlie will show it to people if they want to come, or they can come to the conference this fall. We will have. This is not one of these things that we had it and now it's been lost and no one knows where it is. This thing still exists. People can still look at it and photograph it and examine it. But how the tools that were used to do this, I don't know. Have you ever done any woodworking or stoneworking? Have you ever done any of that?
Not
I was a woodworker for years, and I made a couple of knives. Working with. I was never any good with stone, but this is a tiny little pebble. Excellent word to use to describe it. And the fact that these images are carved so perfectly into it, and have lasted long enough that we can still identify some of them. It had to have been done. I'm reaching here. I have no authority to say this, but it had to have been done with some real backing and some real purpose and intent. Someone wanted this carved for an important reason. It wasn't something that was done by a child playing along the beach, scratching into sandstone. This is a real work of art done with purpose by someone.
Yeah, if you're going to spend that much time,
it had been a long time.
Going eighth of an inch deep on a small pebble in such fine detail, you want to convey some kind of meaning.
It was an important commemoration of some kind. Yeah, it was important.
Yeah, we just don't know what it means.
But you know what I think, Mark. You know what I think? I think that this has been overlooked. I think that with these new high-res pictures that I have, and then in conjunction with the image from the Barry Fell book and the Westford Night, that tying all these images together, that maybe someone who is a PhD or somebody who spends their life as an epigraphic, how that is, interpreting symbols, can now take this information that's been gathered and say, well, wait a minute, we can really zero in on where this came from, and the overriding fact is that we know where and when it was found. It wasn't dropped by someone who was sunning on the beach. It got there. Someone was on a sea voyage, and it got there.
Yeah, you're probably gonna have to match the symbols on the pebble from some other locale. It's pretty unusual.
I think we've done that. We've done it with Barry Fell from Scandinavia, and with this Westford Night. I mean, if the buckler and the ship appear on that knight's shield, and they're almost identical to what is on this stone, that's an extraordinary connection. And I hope that some of the people who study those things can, because we never, keep in mind, none of these images were ever visible before the meeting after the last AAPS conference, when we said, wait a minute, well, what is that there? And so that's when we decided to have the high-res photographs taken, and that's what brought these details out. Until 2 years ago, none of this was, anybody looking at the stone would have overlooked all these details altogether. So this is relatively new stuff.
Ron, when we had Mark and Lori Nicholas as our guests a few months ago, they have in their translation of the the journals of the 15th century Chinese mariners making it to the Cahokia area, and they did. Her book starts from her Feng Tu book starts on chapter 85, where they're leaving a few days celebration in Venice, and they make the voyage to North America, and they come. They moor in the Great Lakes and make their way south to Cahokia. Are any of
Okay.
these images reminiscent of patterns we see in Chinese artwork? I just want instead of just focusing only on the Phoenician or Viking possibility, has anyone looked at the possibility that this could have had Chinese origins?
Very insightful question. I'm going to give you two or three things there. I'll answer directly first. The ship image, yes, that's very common with the Chinese. But the buckler image, the figure 8 buckler image, I don't remember ever seeing that in anything that has to do with Oriental. But And I don't want to get off into this thing that this is necessarily Mediterranean either, because we made this mistake when we were talking about the spider. I with the spider and the crescent moon and the cartouches. Everybody started focusing on looking at it was predisposed to think of the Mediterranean. I don't want anybody to be predisposed about anything about this, because now it's got to be looked at with fresh eyes. On the other thing, though, that has to be, we want to remember about the Orientals, and getting as far as Cahokia and all that. A lot of people talk about, how the copper got from the Keweenaw and from Isle Royal and got to the St. Lawrence Seaway, and they, where the ships and all that. And I'm working up some numbers now on using canoes, which are very revealing. But one thing a lot of people don't realize is that if you go to Ontonagon and enter the Ontonagon River and paddle up the Ontonagon River, you reach a point where even back in these times, back around prehistoric times, there was a spot where you could get out and in 2 portages put your canoe or vessel into the Mississippi River, and go all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, which takes you right by Cahokia and takes you. So just because you could go down the river doesn't mean you couldn't go up it. There was a waterway that went through the center of the upper peninsula where the Whitefish River is, and that was another way for this to be done. So going back, the symbolism of the double-hulled ship is not unusual at all, but the symbolism of the double-hulled ship in conjunction with that figure 8 looking or bird head looking symbol is, the only place I've ever seen it is on this Bronze Age carving from Scandinavia and on the shield of the Westford Knight, which are both European. I'm sure it appears a lot of other European things too, if it appears there. So that's European, not Oriental. That's the only thing I've not seen those two combined in Oriental symbolism.
It just, with the images that you sent to us and what's in the magazine, it's just like one of those artworks where it's like, okay. It's very difficult to find a frame of reference of where the ideas could have come from. I just find it really intriguing. There's also like almost like a flail. Like where the arms are crossed on like King Tut's tomb, and he's holding like that like C-shaped thing.
It looks like a flail, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's on there. It's like okay. That's
the symbolism that's a symbol of power. But you're on exactly the right course here. What we need for someone to do is to look at these images that you guys are going to put up and say, oh, well, I've seen this image with this is used as this symbol in this culture, and this culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not, and in the case like the Westford Knight, on his shield, this is a blessing on the shield. The Native Americans put blessings on, put symbols on their shields to protect them in battle. Everybody did that.
Mm-hmm.
And as did the Chinese. Everybody did that. So, yeah, I don't think there's any question that, and of course, this is where I always end up stopping, is because I don't have the training in this, but here are these symbols across 3 different timelines, 3 different, I don't know about the one in Scandinavia, but I do know the Westford Knight stone still exists, and I know the MacIntosh stone still exists. So if someone wants to say, well, these are all lost, they're not real, no, they are real. And they all predate 1400.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be able to put that whole controversy aside, and there's another whole history here.
Okay, hey, Ron, we're approaching 3-4 minutes left, and
oh no,
yeah, it sounds like you had enough fun where hopefully we can get you to come back and talk more, give us updates. But we do want to give you time to plug more about your website. If people want to contact you, how they do that. You'll be speaking at AAPS. What? So just tell everyone, about your social media sites, et cetera.
You want me to do a commercial? Be happy to.
Yeah, get plug away.
Yeah, so it's MichiganBackroads.com. MichiganBackroads.com. That's the way to find me. My contact information is there. My email is there. My books are there. I have 5 books in print. Oddities and Rarities is the current one, where the erroneous information about this stone is. So you want to buy that book now, because it will become a collector's item when it's updated, because all the typographical errors will be corrected. So you want to get a copy of that. And I will be I speak all over Michigan. If you go to MI Backroads, Facebook MI Backroads, all these are linked. Go to MichiganBackroads.com. All the links are there to find what I do. And I speak all over Michigan. And I will be at the AAPS in October. And I'm certain that Charlie MacIntosh is going to be there with this stone. So if people want to come to that conference, they still have the early bird price, and they can come and they can examine this object and make their own, do their own analysis of it. And I would like to come back. I've got some other great stories about the Viking tool that's in Ontonagon, and the tronic circles that are deep in the forest that no one's ever photographed except me. The Zegogon ruins. I got all kinds of those kinds of things. But again, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm just a guy who hears about it, and then I just have to go find out about it.
Okay. But this is...
So there's your commercial.
Okay. That's great. And
can I make an addition here?
Sure.
Mark,
Yeah.
I know you've got to make a phone call. But,
hi, Barbara.
Hi there. Have you ever had an empath or someone who is sensitive do psychometry with the coin?
No, I had not.
That might be interesting.
It might be very interesting. Of course, see, I don't have it in my possession. It lives with its owner. But I would love to have that happen. I would love to see someone take a hold of this who can tap it, because it's very old. I mean, it's very old.
Everything has an energy. And of course, this has been passed around by a lot of people. But if somebody, and I'm not saying just look for a psychic on the corner. I'm saying look for somebody who has documented authenticity type stuff to them, and because I know that
Mark might know about that too.
Mark might know.
No, Mark might know some of those folks because they come to the AAPS, so he might know somebody who could step up.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Just try to get some help.
I do
It'd
that
be a great
too.
follow-up to do, after this next conference, if some people look at it, it'd be a great follow-up show.
Sure.
It would
We'll
be,
do that.
instead of doing ghost hunting, it would be fun to line up a series of sensitives and have each of them hold a stone, get their impressions, then have them write down what they got, and then compile it all, and those things that everybody got, use them as
we could even have a blind test where we tell some people what they're looking at and tell the others what they don't tell the other people. And this is one of the, and I'm glad you brought this up, Barbara, because I wanted to make it clear how a lot of what I've discovered on this would not have happened if it hadn't been for coincidences and serendipity and just pure accidents. If one woman sitting in an audience hadn't said, well, can you flip that over, a whole new line of investigation never would have been done. And it had to be fate or providence stepping in and saying, hey, Ron, wake up. I can't believe that it wasn't. No, I can't believe that it wasn't something like that.
Yeah, I've seen so many times where they've taken people who do psychometry and given them the opportunity to go with the energy and write down what they have, and quite often, you compile the information. But Mark is telling me I have to shut up. So we'll talk
but I'd love to hear more about this. Yeah, I'd love to hear more because I have the sensitivity of a walnut, but I would love to hear more about this possibility of investigating this thing. So
okay.
Who's giggling? I hear somebody giggling.
That's Mark snorting.
All right, Mark, Barbara, thank you so much for having me. I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, we will, Ron. That was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Good night.
Bye-bye. All right, bye.
Here, I thought I was keeping him occupied so you could call Catherine. So. Oh, I've lost Mark too. Oh, so the show is mine. Well, Mark may have to call back in. So while he is either getting Catherine or calling back in, whichever the case may be, I'll go more into what I was suggesting. A long time ago, I worked with the police department, and they had a whole lot of sensitives / psychics, and they would give us pieces of information and asked us to tune into it, to sort of give them what they got. And I worked on one case that was a murder case, which I don't want to ever do again. But there were, I think, 9 of us, and we all took the information. We all meditated over it. We all gave the police what we got, and we literally were able to recreate what had happened and even get the license plate number of the van that had been used, and they were able to apprehend the man that had done the dirty deed. So it's not that it's something that should be used all the time. It's something that can be used to, it's not an absolute, but in conjunction with other types of evidence, it can enhance things and bring information more together. So it's kind of a cool thing. That you, Mark?
Yes.
Okay.
A little tech issue there.
Yes.
Okay. And found out one way of producing wasn't working too well. I'm going to do it again. But we do. I know our guest is there.
Okay. Oh, did she call into the show?
No, I'm going to call her right now.
Okay, that's a good idea. Otherwise, we could just talk.
Oh, she's there. I just.
I was kidding. Hello?
Okay. The guest is there. We just got sidetrack for a couple minutes, but she's here. So we had an exciting, first hour. We even got to mention Barry Lyndon. So that was a nice lead into you. And let's see, Sereni's birthday's coming up. So happy early birthday to her. It's not the Red Dragon Rider's birthday, but it could be Big Z's. The yummy Greek food lady and her sidekick had their birthdays last month. But, we are celebrating Shakespeare's 455th birthday and 403rd death day. The Folger Library is celebrating, but Nightlight isn't. So what esoteric information do we know that the academics don't know? So to add to our secret archives, our second hour guest is Katherine Chiljan, and she has been studying the Shakespeare authorship controversy for many years. Probably served her term as a secretary-treasurer of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, and she contributed 2 chapters to the contested year and is the author of Shakespeare Suppressed. Her website is shakespearesuppressed.com. So welcome, Katherine, to Nightlight. Thanks for returning.
Oh, my pleasure, Mark.
Yeah.
And Barbara, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so when you were on with us in September, early fall, you and Ramon Jimenez, split time, but you're also promoting the conference, and for the few minutes that about an hour, there were a few minutes where I screwed up with the producing stuff, but you want to go into a little bit more detail about the Shakespeare authorship controversy, and I think Ron's we kind of looking at trying to dispel some myths in the first hour. Maybe we can start off the second hour dispelling or proving the Francis Bacon was a candidate for the writing of the plays we all read in high school. What's the status of that theory?
Well, Francis Bacon was an early favorite for those who doubted the Shakespeare authorship, and we're talking about the 19th century and part of the early 20th century. And it sort of made sense because if you look at the profile of the great author William Shakespeare, the breadth of knowledge was enormous. He knew the law, he knew the sciences, he was a philosopher, and he left a great body of work. But it was mostly philosophical and scientific. But I mean, it made sense to turn to him because of the great author's huge amount of knowledge, but it wasn't then yet discovered about the Earl of Oxford. And so another reason is that Bacon was not known as a playwright or a famous poet. He, as far as we know, he only wrote 1 or 2 masks for the court. And a mask was a form of a play, but not a full play like we know it. Mm-hmm. So, and also there's no real life parallels. So very few people today, and as far as I know, are Baconians. pretty much in 1920 when J. Thomas Loney discovered the Earl of Oxford as Shakespeare. He took a very scientific approach, and he evaluated the plays and the poems and came up with a profile of who the great author, what characteristics he had. And so he tried to find somebody who would match them all, and it turned out to be the Earl of Oxford, and he really has been the lead candidate since 1920. And his followers include many famous people, including Sigmund Freud. He corresponded, I believe, with Mr. Loney. So, and then thereafter, Supreme Court justices and actors like Orson Welles. If listeners want to go to doubtaboutwill.org, you'll see a whole list of the famous doubters, and many of them with very high academic degrees. So that's why I would say it was not Bacon.
Okay. Well, and you just mentioned the since 1920, with the discovery of Edward de Vere as someone who really has the background and characteristics, and he really should be considered as the leading candidate for.
Yes, and he was a famous playwright in his day, an acknowledged playwright. None of his plays, unfortunately, survive with his name on it, but there's a reason for that, which we can go into. He was also a famous poet during his lifetime and acknowledged as one.
Okay, and that was where I was going with. Yeah, you emphasize in your book, Shakespeare Suppressed, that the plays were basically a public performance, but it's in the sonnets that autobiographical themes appear, just how the author felt about people, his innermost thoughts, and that's where this personality emerges that is completely different than the one that our high school history or English teacher presents to us, and the college professor would include in his books on the subject and present in class. And it's really by understanding the sonnets that the real author's relationships with several people emerges, and I just remember in my Shakespeare classes, there's this discussion, and you bring it up in your book too, that there could be an interpretation of an older man having feelings for this younger guy, and it's a little bit of like a gay relationship. But if you make the point that if you look at it, the 154 sonnets as more of a parenting manual, it becomes very clear that it's really a father talking to his son.
Yes, I totally believe that. But I think, going to your first point, that the sonnets really revealed the great author, who he was. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, none of it squares with the orthodox Shakespeare, who is the man born in Stratford-on-Avon. He was the wrong guy. If you look at the sonnets, the author tells us that he was someone highly ranked. For example, in Sonnet 62, he says, "Methinks no face so gracious is as mine." Gracious is a word that was that Shakespeare used to describe nobility and royalty in his plays. Another one you've mentioned it before, Sonnet 125, where it ought to me I bore the canopy, with my extern the outward honoring. And this is a clear reference to the canopy that would be held over Queen Elizabeth. And only important people or courtiers would have the privilege of holding, like 4 poles that hold a canopy over the Queen as she makes a progress, public progress. And here he's saying, was it anything to me that I bore this canopy? Like a bored courtier would say, not somebody from humble origins who would be thrilled to do such a thing. Yeah. And there's also mention of him being disgraced. There's mention of him being lame and like he felt like death was nearing. There's also mention that he was using a pen name. For example, in Sonnet 72, he says, "My name be buried where my body is, and live no more." So these are all characteristics that tell us he was not the man from Stratford, and that he was somebody who was someone very highly placed. And when you know that, then you can read more into the sonnet, the eye. And the sonnets, a great deal of them, about 75% of them, deal with they call him the fair youth, the beautiful young man that the great author loves and finds his beloved. But as you mentioned, I don't believe this is a sexual relationship. I believe it's a father-son relationship. And he lauds him in such high terms because he believed that he was a child of the monarch, Queen Elizabeth. And if you want, we can go further into that. But I think that is kind of the reason, ultimately, why the great author never got credit for his own works.
Okay. Well, we'll get to discussing the Mom in a minute, but these sonnets were written between 1592 through 95, 96, somewhere in that vicinity. He wrote like 154 sonnets in roughly a 4-year period. And I was doing some prep for tonight's show. In Sonnet 2, it talks of when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow. That kind of sounds like the real author has reached a stage in his life where just actually doing some serious reflecting on his life and wanting to communicate something to his son. But
yes, it also indicates an age difference between the two. We have an older man kind of reflecting on his life, and at the same time he's lauding a young man, beautiful young man. Actually, the first 17 or so sonnets, he is urging this young man to marry and have children. Emphatically, he really wanted him to do that. And again, this is not something that squares with a man who
Yeah,
has a homosexual desire.
The man from Stratford in 1592 isn't even 40. He's like only in his early 30s. I mean, there's we're already talking about a different, significant age approaching 10 years. All right, so it already just sounds like the real author and the one we're told who wrote the stuff, there's like a 10-year age difference. How does that fit in with Edward de Vere's timeline? Was he around 10 years older than the man from Shakespeare?
In the 1590s or so, yes, he was in his 40s. And
okay.
Of course, the young man who it's almost universally accepted that he was the third Earl of Southampton, Henry Wriothesley was his name. And he was, at that time, he was in his very early 20s. And we don't know exactly when all the sonnets were written. They could have been written a little bit earlier as well. But there was certainly about a 20 or so year gap between the Earl of Oxford and the Earl of Southampton. And he lauds him as somebody higher than himself. Like one of the sonnets, he calls him Lord of my love, who I in vassalage serve, something like that. So the Earl of Oxford had one of the highest titles in the land, and he was the 17th of a long line of earls. The Earl of Southampton was only the third. So again, we have kind of an inversion of the great author seemed to think that he was of higher rank than himself. Now, again, if you go back to the Stratford man, somebody of no rank whatsoever, urging the young man to have children, marry and have children for love of him, that would have been an affront on a nobleman's name. So again, it's not something that would work with the Stratford man as Shakespeare.
Yeah, it sounds like that Edward de Vere and his son, they're close, but at the early stages of the writing of the sonnets, de Vere still seems like he has a high opinion of Henry's mom. I was looking like in Sonnet 3, talks about thou art thy mother's glass, and she in thee calls back the lovely April of her prime. Kind of flattering.
Yes.
Yeah, just see, and then I don't know what 30 years later. You mentioned in sonnet the first line is 125. It's like, it's like didn't mean anything to me to hold a 10 over your mom. And it seems like there's like through the if you look at the sonnets at the, in the way that you present the information, as it's almost like looking at a family unit, and you can see that they later in 20, 30 years later, they didn't like each other. Edward and Elizabeth didn't like each other.
I guess well, yeah, maybe a jaded feeling, because Oxford, she didn't really promote him at court, and he was stuck with a lot of debts to the crown, and she didn't do a lot to alleviate it, although she did grant him £1,000 per year annuity, which was like close to $1 million now.
Wow.
Perhaps to help him a little bit, and he didn't have to make any reckoning of what he did with the money. So it really was a gift, and she rarely gave such gifts. So some people think it was to compensate for writing the Shakespeare plays and produce them, which was very expensive, especially before the Queen. They had to be a little bit more luxurious as far as costumes, sets, and things. But going back to the Earl of Oxford having a son by Queen Elizabeth, in Sonnet 76, the great author says, "Why write I still all one, ever the same?" And that actually can be read as the a merging of two mottos. The Earl of Southampton's motto, one for all for one, and Queen Elizabeth's motto, semper idem, which means ever the same. So all in one line, and then E Vere, ever, could be a play on Edward de Vere, E Vere. So these are curiosities, but if you read them all in these contexts, it makes sense.
Yeah, and there's also in Sonnet 36, it talks about I may not evermore acknowledge thee, speaking to his son, and then back to 66 that you mentioned in your book, Shakespeare Suppressed, as well, and you make a really powerful point about the line, "And art's made tongue-tied by authority." It sounds like the Queen Elizabeth was really did something to silence him, Edward de Vere. Like there's just something where his relationship with his son came to an end. It wasn't. Something happened, and this tongue, like the tongue-tied by authority was something imposed on Edward. He's another member of nobility, so there can only be a few candidates who could have that power over
authority
him.
Would be, either the Queen or somebody high in her government. And I think it could be the latter. It could have been Sir Robert Cecil, who pretty much was running things at the very end of Queen Elizabeth's life, the last couple of years. And it brings us to the Essex Rebellion of 1601, and the Earl of Southampton was one of the main conspirators, the Earl of Essex and the Earl of Southampton.
Okay,
And,
what was that about?
Well, Essex really wanted to, he didn't necessarily want to depose the Queen, but he wanted to remove the influence of Sir Robert Cecil. And it was kind of a faction between those two. And unfortunately, Cecil won, and Essex lost his head. But surprisingly, the Earl of Southampton, who was convicted of treason and sentenced to death, the sentence was not carried out. And I think that here may have been a deal between the great author Shakespeare and Robert Cecil to keep him alive. And I think it was to keep quiet about his authorship of Shakespeare. Why? Why would that be so valuable? Well, because several of the plays were, you could say, political commentaries, or like, for example, in Hamlet, the main counselor of King Claudius was Polonius. And Polonius, many historians accept that Polonius was a lampooning of Sir William Cecil, later Lord Burleigh, and he was the most powerful man in England at the time. And how can Shakespeare, make fun of him like that? It was obvious. It must have been obvious then, as it is now, that that's what was occurring. So if he said, never own up to being Shakespeare, it would mean that no one would make this connection, because the only person who could make this connection would be someone who knew Lord Burleigh, and that was certainly the Earl of Oxford. So if the world knew that the Earl of Oxford wrote Hamlet, they would see it instantly, and they would see Queen Gertrude as possibly being Queen Elizabeth, and they would make other connections. And that's just one example. There are others in other plays, and of course the sonnets. The sonnets really tell a lot. And if the Earl of Southampton really was Queen Elizabeth's child, that would affect the succession. And that would be another reason to keep it quiet, because if the world knew the Earl of Oxford wrote those sonnets, which were then only circulating in manuscript, they were not printed yet. But if the world knew this, they would read into them and say, hey, looks like Queen Elizabeth had a child. Who was this child, you see? And then the unthinkable happened 5 years after the Queen died, or 6 years. These sonnets were printed. And I think that created a crisis by people who supported the successor of Queen Elizabeth, who was King James of Scotland. And they didn't want to, rock the boat. They didn't want the public at large to know that there may be another person who really should be having the throne, a direct descendant of the Queen. And I think that ultimately sealed Oxford's fate to never be known as the great author Shakespeare. And the cover-up, plans for a cover-up began at that point, in my opinion.
And you do mention that the actual use of the term prince is in Sonnet 55. You also have draw our attention to some of the imagery, like so there's something about a rose and a sun. So the rose was a Tudor
Beauty
symbol.
Rose.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an expression in a few of them. And Queen Elizabeth was known as Beauty. She was called Beauty by other authors. And Beauty's rose would be her child. And that sounds very much, Rose sounds very much like Roseley, Henry Roseley, the Earl of Southampton. So, it all seems to flow very, very smoothly when you have this correct point of view, in my opinion. It all fits like a glove.
Yeah, and that's what. And when you were on in the fall with Ramon, we're just kind of talking a little bit about everything, and got some of the the need to redate the plays. But since we have you on just by yourself tonight, and the topic has already been laid down, for the audience to understand about there is a little bit more to the story than what we're told back in high school. You've had a lot more time to delineate some of these points, and it becomes really fascinating. Like you said, once you see the story presented as a parent, dad talking to his son, the whole 54 sonnets actually fits together, and it's just like when Ron was talking in the first hour about just turn the rock another way. This whole new perspective emerges, and the understanding of what was going on in Queen Elizabeth's courts, 450 years ago. It just all started to make sense. What made Edward de Vere is hushed up, or Southampton is more of it's kind of like dismissed, just to avoid almost like a civil war with this succession issue. It's points like this that has made Shakespeare suppressed such a fascinating book about understanding what was really going on at that time, and it doesn't make a whole lot of difference today. I don't know, but
yeah, it does make a difference today because people who love Shakespeare and the Shakespeare plays, they're going to love them even more so when they have a real biography to put next to them. If they know the Earl of Oxford's life, which is what you do when you do a course on any great artist, you learn about their life first. If you learn about the Earl of Oxford's life, an incredible story, and then you read the plays, you see all these parallels come alive, and you understand him better. And like, for example, imagine his pain, the Earl of Oxford's, and my belief, son, the Earl of Southampton, having an affair with his mistress. There was a love triangle between his son and his mistress. And that is told in the sonnets as well, the Dark Lady. And imagine his pain.
That almost sounds like a Jerry Springer episode.
I know, and it gets that way once you are filled in with the details. And that's what makes this so exciting to know about it.
Okay, so
you feel like you're an insider.
Okay, so Queen Elizabeth and Edward de Vere break up at some point, and Dad and his son are dating the same lady. Okay, so who's the Dark Lady? What's the story there?
Yeah, no, well, if you ask, any Shakespeare professor, they're clueless. They don't know who she is. There's been a controversy for since the beginning of who this lady with dark hair and dark eyes and was promiscuous and was cheating on him. And who was she? Well, if Earl of Oxford is Shakespeare, it's very obvious who she was. The Earl of Oxford had an affair with a dark lady named Anne Vavasor, with dark hair and dark eyes. And she was one of the Queen's attendants. After Oxford took his grand tour of Europe, which was about a year and a half, when he came back, he learned that he was told that the child that he had by his wife was delivered later than he was told. So he pretty much abandoned his wife because he believed she was unfaithful. And he kind of went off and he started an affair with another lady, and that is the dark lady. She was in her, I believe, late teens at the time, and they had a child together. So it was it was a scandal upon a scandal, and he was pretty much obsessed by her, and she's pretty much described in the Sonnets. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but Queen Elizabeth sort of put her foot down and threw them into the Tower of London, including the baby. But Oxford loved her and the baby so much that he named the child after himself, an illegitimate son, Edward Vere. And eventually he was released, but pretty much it was incumbent on him to go back to his wife, which he did. But the affair kept on because there were fights between Oxford and his men and Anne Vavasor's family members and their men. There were street fights, which is very reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet with the street fights, of forbidden love. And eventually Oxford got hurt pretty badly. And we know, based on his letters, a few times, once or twice, he says he's lame. And also the man of the Sonnets says that he's lame. So, yeah, she really consumed his life. And not a few years later, Oxford's wife died, and he was basically free. However, Anne Vavasor at that time was married, and if you read, I believe it's Sonnet 152, he basically reveals that they are both married because he remarried. So that they were both breaking their bed vows. So while they were both married, they both committed adultery with each other. So he really must have been obsessed by her to keep her in his life. And thereafter, she had an affair with somebody else, maybe even at the same time, and had an illegitimate child by him. So she's a very fascinating woman, and she certainly qualifies as Shakespeare's Dark Lady.
Okay.
In fact, she married while her first husband was still alive. She was accused of bigamy, and she was fined for it. So she was quite a woman.
Okay. I think our audience is getting a whole new re-evaluation of the Elizabethan courts tonight. This is perfect. This is exactly what we want to do on Nightlight. But you also present a lot of information that does not gel with what's presented in the traditional Shakespeare biography. Even with those few lost years, that was before he was old enough to get into all this trouble with the ladies at court. So I mean, none of your information is consistent with the traditional biography.
Yeah, well, the traditional biography has absolutely no parallels with the sonnets or any of the plays. So, unfortunately, he really needs to be discounted. And, the public at large and the Shakespeare professors, they've got to come to terms with the fact that there were two William Shakespeares of this period who were involved with the theater. One was a man born in Stratford-on-Avon with the name William Shakespeare. Actually, it was Shakespeare. And the other one was a nobleman, the Earl of Oxford, using a pen name, William Shakespeare, as in spear shaking. And spear shaking during this period was another term for jousting. And the Earl of Oxford was a champion jouster. He won 2 tournaments. This is all documented. So, and often the name Shakespeare for the author was hyphenated, with a hyphen between shake and spear, which was an indication of a made-up name. So we have to, if you just look at the evidence, there's nothing that connects the Stratford man to writing or education while he was alive. It's all after he died that the case was made that he was the great author. But no one in his lifetime said he was, and including his parents, his children, and his grandchild never said so, and his neighbors, and the town of Stratford-on-Avon never said so too. So all of this has to be taken into account.
Okay, so some of this omissions, misleading information that you just mentioned, that does appear in the first folio. You do have that reproduced in your book as well, and you even reproduce the blank pages. So maybe we're down to like 12 minutes left. So let's talk about why so much of the first folio is blank, with the information that should be used to give us a biography of this author that no one knew about.
That's a great question. Yeah, why? You have I think it's about 16 pages of opening prefatory material, and as you say, 5 of those pages are blank. They could have put a biography of the great author in there, but they didn't do that. Instead they had tributes by various people who weren't even dramatists. Hugh Holland and someone named Holland, someone named Diggs, someone named Mab. They were not dramatists. It wasn't like it was his peers. Only Ben Jonson. He gave a wonderful tribute, and he was a dramatist. But yeah, all we have of a biography in there is on one page. Someone mentions Stratford Monument in relation to the great author, and then Ben Jonson calls Shakespeare Sweet Swan of Avon. So, and this is on a different page. You put those together, you have Stratford-on-Avon, and that took hold, obviously, because from that point on, and we're talking 1623, when the Stratford man had been dead for 7 years, that it became a fait accompli, especially because in the church in Stratford-on-Avon was a monument to Shakespeare. But it was not the monument that we know today, where a man bald-headed with an upturned mustache is holding a quill and paper. It was a totally different monument, and we have documentary evidence of that. a drawing made in 1634, but shows a man with a downward drooping mustache and a beard holding a sack. So obviously it had been totally, the original had been dismantled, and they remade it to be one more appropriate to a writer instead of somebody who was, it appears to have been the Stratford man's father who was being depicted, who was a trader of wool. So the sack would be a wool sack. So it just goes on and on, you know, the hoax after hoax.
Okay, so the original monument doesn't add up either, you know, along with the traditional biography. The Stratford, Sweet Swan of Avon comment, and Stratford mentioned a couple pages later in the first folio was a misnomer or a misdirection. It just all this information presented tonight is presents just another personality.
Yeah, and another fascinating thing about the first folio is that it was dedicated to the Earl of Oxford's son-in-law, the Earl of Montgomery. Of course, Oxford had died before his daughter married the Earl of Montgomery, but you know, it was his posthumous son-in-law. The Earl of Montgomery and his brother, the Earl of Pembroke, both of them were given the dedication to this book of Shakespeare plays, and they also were two of King James's biggest supporters. He really, you know, gave them a lot of benefits. So they certainly wanted to keep him on the throne. So they were involved in this cover-up as well. So.
We just keep going deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole. With your book Shakespeare Suppressed, you are presenting a captivating story, unraveling all these, kind of like long forgotten relationships. But what did you want to do with the information? You just trying to sort everything out?
Yes, of course I've been a believer that the Earl of Oxford was a great author for many, many years, and then I saw a debate on television, not a debate on television, a Shakespeare professor being interviewed on C-SPAN, and somebody asked him about the authorship question, and he in essence insulted people who believed that there is any doubt about the Stratford man. And so that inspired me to say, gosh, what makes him so confident in his man? So I really delved in the Stratford man in his case, and right off the bat I noticed all the evidence was after he died, the Stratford man. So that's why I divided the book into lifetime evidence and posthumous evidence. And if you look at the lifetime evidence, contemporaries were saying a completely different things, a different profile of a man. They were hinting that he was a person of high rank. They were hinting that he wrote anonymously. They were hinting that he was dead by 1605. So you can read them. You sort of have to delve a little bit deeper because they often used classical allusions to make their points. They weren't overt. But all you have to do is just dig a little beneath the surface and you can read them correctly. And this is what contemporaries were saying, and it all points to the Earl of Oxford. Yeah.
Okay, and you're just giving credit to the right person, or the person you think was the real author.
Yes, I want everyone who loves Shakespeare to know who he really was. And kind of in a way, I believe that if we don't do this now, who knows, in 100 years or so, people won't even know who Shakespeare was anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Earl of Oxford had such a colorful story. It's going to captivate people and inspire them to read and study him. Again, I think there would be a great renewal of Shakespeare and Shakespeare studies if they had the right biography.
And we're down to about 3 minutes. Your Shakespeare Suppressed is highly praised by Sir Derek Jacobi, and he's basically like today's Sir Laurence Olivier. That's saying a lot about the convincing evidence you present in your book.
Thank you. Yes, and there are many other actors, well-known actors like Sir John Gielgud and Michael York, and as I mentioned, Orson Welles, who all believed, doubted the Stratford man or believed that he was the Earl of Oxford. And, it's so obvious once you sort of look at this objectively. And it's something that we, people who are in English literature courses, that they should bring it up and not challenge, but just, talk about it. And, maybe we may get a little bit of a change. Because really it's English professors who are holding this back, in my opinion. They're just towing the line, the orthodox line, and they really don't want to hear anything else. But everyone outside of that field, like historians and people in linguistics and other languages, doctors, medical people, lawyers, Supreme Court justices, they all see that there is a reason to doubt the traditional attribution.
Okay, and Katherine, we have about a minute left. What's your website? Do you have any upcoming appearances going on? Something in the works?
Well, I'm just working on another book at the moment. I'm not ready to talk about it. And but yes, my website is shakespearesuppressed.com, and my book is available on Amazon. And also, I encourage people to ask their public libraries to order it. It's available for Baker and Taylor, just a big distributor. So that would be great.
Okay. Hey, we are just about out of time. We have Maria Wheatley next Tuesday. Barbara has